The year is 2011. The room is quiet. It's the kind of quiet that only exists in places where money is counted. A junior analyst named Mark shifts in his leather chair. He's looking at a file. The file is for the largest agricultural depositor in the tri-state area. The name on the file is the Coal Farmers Cooperative. Mark reads the numbers again. He doesn't understand them. The assets are spread across 17 different farms, over 9,000 acres in total. But the number that makes him pause is the one in the liabilities column. It's a zero, a clean, perfect zero. No equipment loans, no operating lines of credit, no mortgages. Not on the land, not on the buildings, not on the fleet of green and yellow combines. Mark clears his throat. He picks up the phone. He dials the extension for the bank's senior vice president of agricultural lending, a man named Frank Abernathy. Frank has been with the bank for 42 years. He's a pillar of the community. He knows every farmer by name. He knows their fathers' names. Frank answers on the second ring. His voice is calm, steady. The voice of a man who has seen droughts and floods and everything in between. Mark speaks, a little nervous. "Sir, I'm reviewing the coal cooperative account. I must be missing something. It shows zero leverage across the entire portfolio. Is that an error?" The line is silent for a moment, then another. Mark thinks the call is dropped. He says, "Mr. Abernathy?" Frank's voice comes back, but it's different. It's thinner, older. "No, son, that's not an error." Mark is confused. But how is that possible? 9,000 acres, all of it owned free and clear? How does someone even do that? Frank Abernathy looks out his window. He can see the spire of the old Methodist church. He can see the grain elevator shimmering in the August heat. He remembers a different day, a different office, a different man sitting across from him, a man he was trying to help, a man he was certain he was protecting. "Let me tell you about Thomas Cole," he says. "Let me tell you about the dirt. This channel tells the stories of people who were told no, people who were counted out, people who looked at a closed door and decided to build their own house. We believe these stories matter. They are the real history of this country. If you believe that too, hit the subscribe button. Join us. Because what happened to Thomas Cole is a story you need to hear. It's about more than just a farm. It's about what happens when a good man's certainty becomes a weapon, and what it takes to prove him wrong. Let's go back. The year is 1985. The month is October. The air smells of rain and dying leaves. Thomas Cole sits in a chair that feels too small for him. His hands are resting on his knees. They are strong hands, calloused and stained with the earth. The knuckles are scarred from a lifetime of fixing machinery. Across the desk sits Frank Abernathy. Frank is younger then. His hair is still mostly dark. He has a kind face. He serves on the school board. He coaches Little League. Everyone in town trusts Frank. He's not just a banker. He's a neighbor. He leans forward, his voice gentle. "Tom, I've looked at the numbers. I've run them 3 times. I wish I had better news." Thomas says nothing. He just watches Frank's face. "The harvest was bad," Frank continues. "The prices are in the tank. This drought, it's hitting everyone. You're not alone in this." Thomas finds his voice. It's rough, like gravel. "I just need a small loan, Frank. Enough to get the winter wheat in. Enough to cover the note until spring. If I can get a crop in the ground, I can make it right. My father never missed a payment. Not in 40 years. "I know, Tom. I know." Frank sounds genuinely sad. "Your father was a great man. One of the best farmers this county has ever seen." He pauses, choosing his words carefully. "But the economics have changed. You can't farm 160 acres and make a living anymore. Not with these prices. Not with this debt load. It's a scale game now. You need 1,000 acres to make the numbers work." Thomas's jaw tightens. "This is my family's land, Frank. My grandfather cleared this land with a team of mules. My father is buried on that hill overlooking the creek." "I understand," Frank says, and he sounds like he does. "And that's why this is so hard. But I can't, in good conscience, extend you more credit. It wouldn't be helping you. It would be hurting you. It would just be digging a deeper hole. Have you ever been told you couldn't do something? Not by an enemy, not by a rival, but by someone who genuinely believed they were protecting you. Someone who used the language of kindness to deliver a verdict. It's a strange kind of pain. It cannot be fought with anger. It can only be disproven. And that takes time. Decades sometimes. If you've ever felt that, let us know in the comments below." Because Thomas Cole was feeling it right then, in that small office, under the fluorescent lights. He felt something he couldn't quite name. It wasn't anger, not contempt. It was something softer, and in some ways worse. It was the feeling of being erased, gently, kindly, for his own good. He stood up. The chair scraped against the linoleum floor. "So that's it then?" Frank looked pained. He stood up too. He wanted to put a hand on Thomas's shoulder, but he stopped himself. "The bank's board has already reviewed the file, Tom. We're going to have to call the note. I'm sorry, truly. We will begin foreclosure proceedings." Thomas looked at the man he had known his whole life, the man who had given him a silver dollar at his high school graduation, the man who had served as a pallbearer at his father's funeral. And he saw a stranger, a man made of numbers, a man whose kindness was a cage. He walked out of the office. He didn't slam the door. He closed it softly behind him. The click of the latch was the only sound. He drove home in his father's old Ford pickup. The truck was 20 years old. The engine knocked. The paint was faded to a dull, rust-colored red. But it was paid for. He turned down the long gravel driveway, the one he had learned to ride a bike on. The house his grandfather built stood at the end of it, white paint peeling, the porch swing moving slightly in the breeze. His wife, Mary, was waiting on that porch. She saw his face as he got out of the truck. She knew. She didn't ask. She just came down the steps and put her arms around him. He stood there for a long time, a man who worked from sun up to sundown, a man who could rebuild a tractor engine with his eyes closed, a man who knew the language of the soil, and he felt like a failure. They went inside. The foreclosure notice arrived 2 weeks later. It was a formal letter, full of legal words, words that felt alien in that house. But the meaning was simple. They had to be out. The auction was scheduled for the 1st of December, but there was a smaller date, a crueler date. The bank would take possession of the property in 48 hours. They had 2 days to vacate the only home they had ever known. 2 days to pack up a century of life. 2 days to become ghosts on their own land. Thomas read the letter at the kitchen table, the same table where his mother had taught him to read. The wood was worn smooth with the memory of family dinners, of homework, of late-night conversations over coffee. He put the letter down. He looked at his hands. He thought of Frank Abernathy's kind, sad eyes. "I'm doing this for your own good, Tom." The words echoed in his head. That night he couldn't sleep. He walked the fields. The moon was bright. The harvested corn stalks stood like skeletons in the silver light. He knelt down. He picked up a handful of dirt. It was dry, crumbly. He let it run through his fingers. This was his. Not the deed in the bank's vault. Not the numbers on a ledger. This. The feel of it. The smell of it. His grandfather had poured his sweat into this ground. His father had poured his life into it. "They can take the deed," a voice in his head said. It was his father's voice, a memory from a long time ago. "They can't take the dirt from under your fingernails. The dirt is enough." Thomas stood up. Something shifted inside him. The shame began to burn away, replaced by a cold, quiet resolve. He would not be erased. The next morning, the phone started ringing. It was his neighbor to the west, Silas Blackwood. Silas was 70 years old. He had farmed the land next to the coals for half a century. He spoke without preamble. "Tom, I heard about the bank. Is it true?" Thomas said it was. There was a pause. Then Silas said, "The missus is making a casserole. We'll be over in an hour. Don't you touch a single box. You hear me?" Then he hung up. An hour later, Silas's old John Deere tractor pulled into the driveway. His wife, Martha, got out with a casserole dish wrapped in a towel. Behind them came another tractor, a red International Harvester. It was the Jensens from down the road. Then a Ford, then an Alice Chalmers. One by one they came, 14 tractors in all. They didn't pull into the yard. They parked across the entrance to the driveway, side by side, a wall of steel and rubber, a silent, immovable line. Thomas and Mary came out onto the porch. The farmers got out of their cabs. They were older men, mostly, men who had known Thomas's father, men who had borrowed tools and shared harvests for generations. They didn't say much. They just nodded at Thomas. Silas Blackwood walked up the steps. He was a tall, thin man with a face like a road map. He looked at Thomas. "The sheriff is a good man. He won't want to make trouble with 14 taxpayers. The bank man will come. He'll see this. He'll have to go back and make a phone call. That will buy you time." "Time for what?" Thomas asked. His voice was hoarse. Silas smiled a little. Time to think. Time to work. The two things a farmer is best at. "Now, are you going to let Martha's casserole get cold?" The bank man did come. He drove a new Buick. He saw the line of tractors. He saw the quiet, weathered faces of the men standing beside them. He didn't even get out of his car. He just put it in reverse and drove away. Frank Abernathy got the call 20 minutes later. He listened, his hand rubbing his forehead. He felt a flash of anger, then something else, a quiet, grudging respect. He had followed the rules. He had done what the numbers told him to do. He had been reasonable. But the tractors on the driveway weren't reasonable. They were something else. They were loyalty. They were memory. They were the unwritten rules of a community, rules that didn't show up on a balance sheet. He told the man to stand down, for now. "Let's give them a week," he said. "Let them leave with dignity." He thought he was being kind. He still believed he was in control of the story. That evening, the farmers sat around Thomas Cole's kitchen table. They drank coffee. They talked about the weather. They talked about the price of soybeans. They did not talk about the bank. Finally, Silas Blackwood cleared his throat. The room went quiet. He turned to Thomas. "Tom, you know that 40-acre parcel I own on the north side of the creek? The one that's been fallow for 10 years? Thomas nodded. It was poor land, rocky and sloped. Everyone knew it was worthless. "I'm getting too old to work it," Silas said. "And my boy has no interest. I want you to work it." Thomas was stunned. "Silas, I can't pay you rent. I have nothing." Silas waved a hand, dismissing the thought. "This ain't about rent. It's a sharecrop, the old way. You do the work, we split the profit, whatever there is. You use my barn. You use my tools. But I don't have a tractor, Thomas said. The bank is taking everything. Silas pointed a long, bony finger out the window. You see that old Alice Chalmers? The one your father bought in 1958? The one the bank thinks is worthless scrap? Thomas nodded. It had been sitting in his barn for a decade. It hadn't run in years. Silas smiled. Your father taught you how to fix things. I reckon you can make that old girl run again. He stood up. The meeting was over. The plan was made. It wasn't a plan born in a boardroom. It was a plan born at a kitchen table. A plan built on a handshake. A plan fueled by coffee and loyalty. And so it began. The quietest rebellion in the county's history. Thomas Cole, the man who had lost everything, went to work. He didn't have money. He didn't have credit. But he had 2 hands, and he had 40 acres of forgotten land, and he had his father's voice in his head. The dirt is enough. He spent that first winter in the barn. He took the engine of that old Alice Chalmers apart, piece by piece. He cleaned every piston. He soaked the carburetor in kerosene. He used parts scavenged from 2 other junked tractors. He worked by the light of a single bare bulb. His hands were cut and bleeding. He was cold. He was tired. But for the first time in months, he wasn't ashamed. He was building. In March of 1986, the tractor started. It was a cloud of blue smoke and a glorious, deafening roar. Thomas sat in the iron seat. He felt the vibration through his entire body. It was the sound of a second chance. He drove the tractor to Silas's 40 acres. The neighbors watched him go. Some of them shook their heads. They felt sorry for him, trying to farm that rock pile with a tractor that belonged in a museum. It was a fool's errand. Frank Abernathy heard about it at the Rotary Club meeting. Someone mentioned it as a sad story. Poor Tom Cole, too proud to give up. Frank just nodded. He felt a pang of something that might have been guilt, but he pushed it down. He had done the right thing. The numbers proved it. Thomas Cole was just delaying the inevitable. But Thomas wasn't thinking about the numbers. He was thinking about the soil. The land was poor because it had been farmed too hard for too long. The life had been taken out of it. He didn't have money for fertilizer. He didn't have money for pesticides. So he did what his grandfather had done. He started making his own soil. He collected manure from Silas's dairy cows. He gathered fallen leaves from the woods. He started a compost pile the size of a small house. He planted cover crops, clover and vetch, crops you couldn't sell, crops that you plowed back into the earth. His neighbors thought he was crazy, wasting a whole season on weeds. But Thomas knew what he was doing. He was feeding the dirt. He was giving back. That first year, he planted soybeans. The yield was low, just as everyone expected. He made a profit of $8,200. He gave half of it, $4,100, to Silas Blackwood. Silas tried to refuse it, but Thomas insisted. A deal is a deal. Silas took the check. He didn't cash it. He put it in a drawer in his kitchen. The next year, the yield was better. The soil was darker, richer. Thomas made a profit of $15,500. He gave Silas his half. This time, Silas took it, but he didn't spend it. The third year, something remarkable happened. There was a dry spell in late summer. The other farms in the county were suffering. The corn was curling up. The soybeans were wilting. But Thomas Cole's fields were different. They were still green. The soil he had built was holding the moisture, like a sponge. While his neighbors' fields were cracking and dry, his were alive. His yield was the highest in the county. That year, he made a profit of $38,000. Frank Abernathy saw the numbers at the co-op. He didn't believe them. He drove out to Silas Blackwood's place. He stood on the road and looked at the fields. He saw the difference. It was undeniable. He felt that old, familiar feeling again, the one he couldn't quite name. It felt like being wrong. But he was a man of numbers, a man of logic. This was an anomaly, a fluke. It couldn't be sustained. That winter, Thomas went to see Silas. He brought his financial records, 3 years of meticulous notes in a spiral notebook. He also brought a cashier's check. The amount was $20,000. He slid it across the kitchen table. "I want to buy the 40 acres, he said. Silas looked at the check. Then he looked at Thomas. "The price for that land is $40,000, Tom. Everyone knows that." Thomas nodded. "I know. This is a down payment. I'll pay you the rest over 5 years. Silas opened the kitchen drawer. He took out the first check Thomas had ever given him, the one for $4,100. He pushed it back across the table. "Here's your down payment. You already made it 3 years ago." He stood up and went to a filing cabinet. He came back with the deed to the land. He had already signed it over to Thomas. He had signed it a year ago. He was just waiting for Thomas to be ready. "Don't you argue with me," Silas said, his voice thick with emotion. "A man deserves to own the land he brought back to life." Thomas Cole was a landowner again. He owned 40 acres of what was once the worst land in the county. He owned it free and clear. He had bought it with cash. And this is where the story starts to accelerate. Because Thomas Cole didn't stop. He had a system now. A system that didn't rely on a bank. A system that relied on the dirt. 1990. The farm next to his went up for sale. 80 acres. The owner was retiring. He wanted $100,000. Thomas offered him $90,000. Cash. The deal was done in a day. 1993. A 120-acre parcel on the other side of the creek came on the market. It was a bank foreclosure. Frank Abernathy's bank. The auction was held on the courthouse steps. Thomas Cole stood at the back of the crowd. He didn't say a word until the very end. He made one bid. It was $5,000 more than the previous bid. He paid with a cashier's check. Cash. Frank Abernathy was there. He saw Thomas. Their eyes met. Frank gave a small, polite nod. Thomas just looked at him. No anger, no triumph, just a quiet, unshakable presence. The years stacked up like cordwood. 1998. Thomas bought 200 acres, cash. 2002. He bought 350 acres. This time it was from a farmer who was deep in debt to Frank's bank. Thomas didn't just buy the land. He hired the farmer to manage it for him. He paid him a good salary. He taught him his methods. The community was no longer divided. The whispers had stopped. The doubters were now admirers. Young farmers started coming to him for advice. He never turned anyone away. He would walk the fields with them. He would show them his compost piles. He would talk about the soil. He never mentioned the bank. He never mentioned Frank Abernathy. He didn't have to. His success was a quiet, continuous roar. By 2010, Thomas Cole was no longer just a farmer. He was the center of a new kind of agriculture in the county. He had helped a dozen other farmers transition to his methods. They had formed a cooperative. They shared equipment. They shared knowledge. They sold their crops together, commanding better prices. And none of them held any debt. They were free, self-sufficient. They had fireproofed their lives against the whims of the banks and the markets. And all of it started with 40 acres of bad land, a broken-down tractor, and a kind man who told him it was impossible. Which brings us back to 2011, back to the quiet office, back to the phone call between the young analyst and the old banker. Frank Abernathy finished telling the story. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. The young analyst, Mark, finally spoke. His voice was full of awe. "So, what happened to his original farm, the 160 acres?" Frank sighed, a deep, weary sound. He bought it back, about 15 years ago, bought it from the insurance company that had bought it from the bank. He paid 5 times what it was worth in '85. Paid for it with cash, of course. Mark was quiet for a moment. Then he asked the question that had been bothering him the whole time. "Mr. Abernathy, were you the banker? The one who foreclosed on him?" Frank closed his eyes. The years fell away. He was back in that small office. He could see Thomas Cole's face, the quiet dignity, the deep hurt. "Yes, son, I was. I was the man who told him he couldn't do it. I thought I was helping him. I thought I was protecting him from failure. I was certain I was right. And that certainty, it cost him his family home. It cost him years of his life. It turns out my certainty wasn't worth a damn. His knowledge of the dirt, that was everything." That conversation was the beginning of the end for Frank Abernathy. Not his career. He was successful, respected. But the end of his certainty, the thing that had guided his entire life, it was gone, replaced by a quiet, persistent humility. He saw Thomas Cole at the diner sometimes, or the hardware store. Thomas was always polite. He would nod, ask about Frank's family. But there was a distance, a space between them that could never be crossed. It was the space created by that one conversation 30 years before. In 2012, a new crisis hit. Not a drought, a financial crisis. A complex web of derivatives and bad loans brought the global economy to its knees. It hit the Farm Belt hard. Commodity prices collapsed. Operating loans were called in. Frank Abernathy's bank was heavily exposed. Decades of encouraging farmers to get bigger, to take on more debt, had left them vulnerable. The bank was on the verge of insolvency. The board held an emergency meeting. The air in the room was thick with fear. They needed a miracle, an investor, someone with deep pockets and a belief in the local community. In the middle of the meeting, the door opened. The bank's lawyer walked in. He was with another man. A man in a simple work shirt and clean blue jeans. It was Thomas Cole. He looked older, his hair was gray, but his eyes were the same, clear and steady. He didn't speak, he let the lawyer talk. The lawyer laid out a proposal. The Cole Farmers Cooperative was offering to buy the bank's entire agricultural loan portfolio. All of it. The good loans and the bad. They would pay 50 cents on the dollar. The offer was all cash. The room was silent. The board members looked at each other. It was a low-ball offer, but it was also the only offer. It would save the bank. The bank president looked at Frank Abernathy. Frank was the one who knew these farmers. He was the expert. Frank looked at Thomas Cole. This was it. The reckoning. The final chapter of a story he had started 30 years ago. He expected to see triumph in Thomas's eyes, a flicker of revenge. But there was nothing. Only a calm resolve. Frank cleared his throat. His voice was steady. "It's a fair offer. We should take it." The deal was accepted. Thomas Cole and his cooperative of debt-free farmers now owned the debt of their neighbors. They were the bank. The next day, Thomas held a meeting, not in a boardroom, but in the high school gymnasium. Every farmer who had a loan with the bank was there. They were scared. They expected to be ruined. They expected Thomas Cole to do to them what the bank had done to him. Thomas stood at a simple podium. He looked out at the faces of his community, men and women he had known his whole life. He began to speak. His voice was quiet, but it filled the large room. "I know you're all worried," he paused. "I've been where you are. I know what it feels like to have someone else hold the deed to your life's work. So I'm here to tell you, we are not foreclosing on a single farm. A wave of relief washed over the room. People started to cry. Thomas held up a hand. But things are going to change. We are going to restructure every loan. The interest rate is now 0. You will pay us back when you can, when the harvest is good and the prices are fair. But you are going to learn a new way to farm, our way. You are going to learn how to get out of debt and stay out. You are going to learn how to feed your soil so it can feed you. We are not going to be a community of debtors anymore. We are going to be a community of owners. He finished speaking. The gym was silent for a moment. Then someone started to clap. Then another. Soon, the entire room was on its feet. The applause was deafening. It wasn't just for the 0% loans. It was for something more. It was for the hope of a different future. A future they owned themselves. Frank Abernathy wasn't there. He had retired from the bank the day after the deal was signed. He watched the story on the local news. He saw the faces of the farmers. He saw the quiet strength on Thomas Cole's face. And for the first time, he understood. Thomas hadn't spent 30 years trying to beat him. He had spent 30 years building something better. The legacy of that day is still alive in that county. The Cole Cooperative is now a model for the nation. They have a scholarship fund that sends 2 kids from the county to agricultural college every year. The only condition is that they have to come back and farm here for at least 10 years. They run workshops on sustainable farming, on financial management, on how to fix your own damn tractor. The original 160-acre Cole farm is now a non-profit teaching farm. A place where young farmers can learn the methods Thomas developed. They learn about cover crops. They learn about composting. They learn about the life in the soil. And in the old barn, on the wall, there is a small framed piece of paper. It's the foreclosure notice from 1985. Underneath it is a simple brass plaque. It just says, "The dirt is enough." And next to it, mounted on a piece of polished oak, is a single old, rusty tractor key. It's the key to Silas Blackwood's John Deere, the first tractor in the line. It's a reminder, a physical artifact of a time when the rules failed and neighbors had to make their own. Right now, somewhere in the world, someone is sitting in a small office, across from a kind person who is telling them no, telling them they can't, telling them it's for their own good. Maybe that person is you. Maybe it was you a long time ago. The most dangerous limitation is the one that comes disguised as protection, because you can't fight it with anger. You can't argue with its logic. You can only do what Thomas Cole did. You can pick up a handful of dirt. You can find the one thing they can't take away, and you can start building. It will be quiet. It will be lonely. It will take decades. But in the end, you won't just prove them wrong. You will build a world where their opinion no longer matters. If this story means something to you, if you see a piece of your own life in it, let us know in the comments. And share this story with someone who needs to hear it, someone who is facing a closed door, someone who needs to be reminded that the most powerful things in this world often start small, with a handful of dirt and a quiet decision to begin. Subscribe for more stories of the ones who were told no, the ones who built their own way. We'll see you in the next one.